Good morning. Happy Palm Sunday. Yay! My name is Poozhikala, if we haven't met before, and I'm going to be delivering today's message. Normally, we would be covering Jesus' triumphal entry on Palm Sunday, but we're not doing that this year because we already covered the triumphal entry at the very beginning of this series. So we have some other stuff that we really need to get through. But just be aware that today we would normally cover the triumphal entry because that would be following the same timeline as Jesus. So Jesus rode into Jerusalem on the donkey to the praises of all the people. And then a week later on the next Sunday, he rose from the dead. So that's why we normally do that. You can keep that in mind, but we're not talking about that today. Instead today, because we've only covered the triumphal entry, the Last Supper, and the road to the Garden of Gethsemane, today we're covering Gethsemane, Jesus' trial and everything that went with that, and then his crucifixion. Okay, so we've got a lot to get through. But that being said, we're going to be calling today's message the road to the cross, right? So for the sake of simplicity, we're going to be mainly pulling from the Gospel of John, but all of the Gospels do have a lot to say about these events. We're sticking with John, though, because we've been pulling from John throughout this series, so it just kind of makes sense. However, even if we only read from John about these events, we would still spend our entire time reading if we did read everything that he has to say. So I encourage everyone to read John 18 and 19 this week on your own time because it's really good stuff and we're only going to get to read part of it. But for right now, we're going to be going through kind of a summary of these events and using some supplementary scriptures from John. So let's get into it. Last week, if you remember, we left off with Jesus commissioning his disciples, knowing that he was about to go be crucified. So he commissioned them, wanting them to continue to share his teachings for all of the people on the road to Gethsemane. Now we're going to pick up in Gethsemane. Okay, so this is what Jesus did in Gethsemane. Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. So I did just say that we were going to be pulling from John, and this is from Mark. But that's because John doesn't say anything about the Garden of Gethsemane other than they went there. And I thought it was important to include a little bit of what Jesus prayed because it's just good for us to know what he went through, I think. But the rest of our scriptures are going to be from John. Don't worry, I didn't lie. So, spoiler alert, the cup did not pass from Jesus. He did have to continue on to being crucified. And so the first betrayal that actually happened to him on this night was his disciples fell asleep while he was praying. So he was literally sweating blood, crying, and like freaking out. Not freaking out, but he was going through it and his disciples fell asleep while that was happening. So that was his first betrayal. The second betrayal was that Judas, one of his closest friends, one of his 12 disciples, went to the Jewish leaders and led them to Jesus to be killed. So he shows up at the Garden of Gethsemane with a literal crowd carrying pitchforks and torches like you would see in the movies and betrays Jesus, hands them over to them. Now, this was much to Peter's chagrin. Peter was another one of Jesus's closest friends, one of his disciples. Peter tried to defend Jesus and sliced the ear off of one of the people who was trying to arrest Jesus, one of the high priest's servants. And this is how Jesus responded to Jesus slicing off that ear. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Okay, so we see that Jesus has come to terms with the reality of what he has to go through. And he actually healed the ear of that man. And what's really fun is that John mentions the man whose ear was healed by name, which makes us think that John probably talked directly to this person after this happened. And it gives us a glimpse as to how Jesus was changing lives even on the road to the cross. Even while he was being betrayed, he was impacting people for the kingdom. So that's just a really cool side note. Okay, so Jesus went with his captors willingly, and then he was brought before the Jewish high priests, the Jewish leaders. And he was kind of put on trial, but the catch is his trial was already decided before he even showed up. The Jewish leaders had been planning to get Jesus killed for a long time by this point. So Jesus actually kind of called them out on that. They're asking him all these questions, pretending he's on trial, and Jesus basically goes, you've seen me preaching. I've been preaching publicly for a long time now. I've seen you there. I know you have spies that have been reporting to you. He doesn't say it like this, but that's essentially the gist of it. And because he said that, he gets slapped. So this is his response to being slapped. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? How do you think they answered that? They didn't. They had no answer to that because they pretty clearly did not care about the truth at this point, right? And that's going to become a bit of a theme that you will continue to see throughout the road to the cross, is the truth being ignored. And side note, another thing that was happening during all of this was Peter, the same guy who cut off the ear of the high priest's servant, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Yet another terrible betrayal that Jesus had to suffer. He denied even knowing Jesus 3 times because he was afraid of being killed as well. Probably. That's what we assume. Okay, so Jesus went through his trial with the Jewish leaders, and then he was brought before the Roman governor, Pilate, because the Jewish leaders didn't actually have the power to legally execute anybody at this point, but they wanted Jesus dead. So they basically went to Pilate and they're like, kill this guy. And Pilate, being a semi-reasonable person, he goes, why? Why do you want me to kill him? And this is how they answered at first. If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. How sketchy. What a weird reply. They're basically going, oh, trust us, just kill him. Okay, so Pilate kind of goes, that is a sketchy reply, and he decides to investigate a little bit further on his own. And we're going to read more of this exchange than some of the other parts because it's very powerful, very interesting. Pay attention here. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea? Jesus asked. Or did others talk to you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. Pretty interesting stuff, right? Now, there's a lot that I would love to go into in this exchange, but we can only go through so many angles. So I encourage you to just kind of look into this, read some commentaries, look into this further on your own time. Once again, on your own time, sorry. Because it's really, really cool stuff and lots of philosophy, all of that stuff. Okay, and then another interesting side note that I would like to note is that in the Gospel of Mark, it's recorded that Pilate's wife told Pilate, do not kill this guy. Do not have anything to do with him. He's innocent. Because she had been having dreams that were freaking her out. So that kind of explains why Pilate is a little bit hesitant to do what the Jewish leaders say, right? And actually, Pilate attempted many more times to keep Jesus from going to the cross. He tried first just like telling everybody, this guy's innocent. Like, why would I kill him? That didn't work. Still wanted him dead. He tried having him punished in a different way. He tried flogging him and mocking him, and they still wanted him killed. He even tried saying, well, it's Passover. It's tradition for us to release one Jewish prisoner. What if I release Jesus? And they were like, no, give us a murderer instead. So for whatever reason, Pilate ultimately did not stand up to the Jews who still wanted Jesus dead after all of that. He sent Jesus to be crucified. And throughout the whole brutal process, Jesus was terribly mocked, like crazy mocked. Did you know that the other guys who were crucified with Jesus mocked him? The other people who were being punished in the same exact way were mocking Jesus, who was the only one who was perfectly innocent. And you would think maybe the pain of being crucified would discourage them from mocking him. Nope. They're like hanging on the cross in extreme pain, mocking Jesus. And Jesus did nothing to stop them. He was humiliated, hung on the cross, and killed, and he didn't stop it. So as I was reading through all of this, I was struck with one persistent question. Why didn't Jesus defend himself? You may think that the answer to this is obvious, or you might agree with me that this is a good question. But I think it's fair to assume that most anyone in Jesus' shoes would want to defend themselves. I mean, being accused and treated unfairly tends to bring that out of people, and rightfully so in some ways. I mean, even Jesus' disciples, it brought that out of them, right? They were the closest followers of Jesus. They knew his teachings the most, and they still wanted to defend him. Furthermore, don't you think it might have been beneficial for people to hear the truth, to understand the truth, and know it? I mean, not only for his disciples, but even for the Jews and the Romans that were persecuting Jesus. Shouldn't they have been put in their place? Even Pilate kind of begged Jesus to defend himself because, again, his wife's like, don't get this guy killed. It's bad. So Pilate's like, okay, help me out here, Jesus. Like, give me a defense here. And actually, after the Jewish leaders finally admitted that they wanted Jesus killed because he claimed to be the Son of God, read this. Let's look at this. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid and went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. So what we see here is Jesus' most basic answer as to the question of why he wouldn't defend himself. And the answer is God's will. Okay? For Jesus to resist his trial and his execution would be for him to resist God's will. And we all know that Jesus would never do that. Right? But then you might be wondering, well, why would a good God want his perfect and beloved son to be brutally murdered? It's a good question. There's a lot I could say, but I'm going to try to give a basic, thorough but basic answer because we do have a lot that I still want to get to. So God is perfect, right? He's the source of every good and perfect gift, and therefore he can have nothing to do with evil. The problem is we're all evil. We've all sinned, okay? But God is love, so he still wants to be in relationship with us. Jesus was God's answer to this seemingly impossible dilemma because Jesus was perfect. He was the perfect sacrifice that was necessary for goodness and justice to be upheld while still allowing us to be in relationship with God. His death on the cross saves us from an eternity of suffering caused by being separated from the source of every good and perfect gift. With that in mind, it seems appropriate to take today to remember and celebrate what Jesus did on the cross. And that's what we're doing by going through this story. But as is tradition around here at Renovate, I want to add a little bit of a twist into that worthy and simple goal. And the twist is that I want to address something that rarely gets addressed in this context. It's a huge obstacle that keeps us from truly and fully appreciating what Jesus did for us. What is that obstacle, you may ask? I don't know. What is it? Is it shalom? What is it? Is it shabuya? Oh, right. It's shame. Right. I love that effect. I use that all the time. But the relationship between Jesus's humble trial and his death and shame might seem a little bit confusing at first, but if we think of it just very practically, it can start to make sense, okay? So think of it like this. How do you feel when you forget about your anniversary and your spouse shows up to your work with flowers and a perfect plan for like a date night? Or how do you feel when you don't get your parents a present on their birthday and you realize they've been getting you a present on your birthday every year of your entire life? How do you feel when you tell your kids, no, we can't eat out, we have food at home, and then you see online that some of your friends took their kids to Disneyland? Or how do you feel when you yell at someone and they don't yell back? How do you feel when you accuse someone of something and it turns out they didn't do it? How do you feel when you're mean to someone who's never been mean to you? you probably feel shame. You feel bad. Now, all of us come up short sometimes, part of the human experience, but another part of the human experience is that when you consistently come up short, or when you consistently feel like you make worse choices than everybody else around you, you can sink pretty quickly into shame. And now some people end up identifying themselves as like a bad person or a loser or a jerk. And if that's you, if you've had maybe a rough past or fallen into addiction or have made some bad choices that set your life on a trajectory you can't reverse, if that's you, you're probably pretty familiar with this idea of shame. Chances are a lot of people make you feel bad about themselves, make you feel bad about yourself by simply existing, right? Because you think, oh, well, they're better at making good choices than I am, or life's easier for them. They just do better at life, okay? You might even start to avoid good people. Listen to me, you guys. If that's you, if you identify this way, you're falling into the devil's trap. That's what that means. So usually if you identify as a loser, you're going to hate being around good people because they make you feel like you're a bad person. You're going to avoid them because their lack of regrets will highlight your constant regret. On the other hand, this is still within the realm of shame though. On the other hand, some people think of themselves as a great person. They think of themselves as super successful, a baller, hardworking, all of those things. And in thinking that, sorry, somebody made me laugh. Okay, in thinking that, you might think, oh, well, other people are worse than me. I'm better. And the only reason that I have so many good things is because I'm hardworking and everybody else is lazy and stupid and blah, 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 blah. Okay, now I know this sounds harsh, but it's a lot more common than you may think. Now, obviously, personally, I haven't met a ton of these people because you guys are my friends and you aren't like that, right? But they are very common, especially online, right? Or on TV. And I think part of that reason is because the most worldly successful people tend to be showcased in those areas. So we do run into these people. But I think the only reason we don't run into them more is actually because most people don't feel that they've achieved enough to justify acting that way. It's not because they think acting that way is wrong, at least. They hate when other people act that way, but given the chance, they would act that way. I think this is the case for most people, actually, you guys. In fact, the first kind of person that I talked about usually is going to wish that they could be this kind of person, but they just don't feel that they deserve it yet. And I would even argue that the rags to riches kind of people are the cockiest, because they tend to think that they've achieved their riches by their own merit. That's the definition of building your foundation on sinking sand, by the way. On the other hand, there are some people, a lot of them are in this room, there are some people who do love Jesus and believe that their worth comes from him and not from anything that they can do on their own. These people want to love God and love others. They really do exist. However, they still are not free from the effects of shame. Okay, now obviously we all deal with it once in a while, but the effects of shame get to them because other people hate them out of their own shame. Shame still gets to them, right? And in that dynamic, that causes good people or people who follow Jesus to almost want to do bad things just so that other people will accept them. And if you don't believe me that these people are hated, take Jesus for an example. I mean, he was perfect. He was literally perfect, and people hated him so much they killed him. I would argue a large motivation for that was shame. Okay. So my mom's always said that straight or bent sticks only feel bent when they're put next to straight sticks. Okay, and Jesus was the straightest stick of all time in this metaphor. And so everybody probably felt pretty screwed up when they looked at Jesus. And nobody likes to feel that way. Nobody likes to feel lesser than anybody else. Nobody likes to have their sin highlighted. And so even though no other human aside from Jesus can be perfectly straight, if you follow Jesus, he makes you a pretty straight stick. And what you'll run into is people hating you for highlighting their flaws. Okay, that's pretty sad, isn't it? Now, no matter where you fall on the spectrum of shame, there is one answer that solves all of it. And that answer can be found on the road to the cross, in Jesus' example. Now, recall our summary of everything that he went through leading up to his crucifixion, right? He faced many false accusations, all kinds of unfair treatment, and death. Pretty much every terrible thing that can happen to you in this life, he faced. And yet, he didn't freak out. He didn't even defend himself. Think about what you would do in his shoes. I don't know about you guys, but I would definitely pull some kind of, "How dare you? Who do you think you are to lay hands on me? I'm the perfect Son of God." And then I would smite them all because they deserve it, those jerks. And that's why I'm not the perfect Son of God, right? That and my distinct lack of a beard. But that all brings us full circle back to the question of why didn't Jesus defend himself? He very much could have. Not only was he perfectly innocent and therefore had a case that couldn't be defeated, but he was the Son of God, so he could have snapped his fingers and stopped everything just like that. Why didn't he? Well, for starters, there's God's will. Now, we've already mostly covered this one, but I wanted to bring it up again because I want to talk about how this applies to us, where we're at in our lives now. You see, Jesus had his priorities straight. He was human. He did not want to suffer what he had to suffer. He didn't want to be tortured or killed. That's why he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane the way that he did. However, not even those fears were enough to stop him from following God's will. That's where his priority laid. And that's so important for us to understand and practice, you guys. This life can throw a lot of stuff at us. It can throw false accusations, unfair treatment, torture, and death our way. But we need to be willing to follow God's will no matter what we're threatened with. We need to fear God above all else, right? Yes, those things hurt, and there's nothing we can do to stop it from hurting. But we need to know that it can't harm us. It can't ultimately harm us. When you follow God's will, everything will be okay. In fact, think of it this way. The only person who's ever had to truly sacrifice is Jesus. Now, don't get me wrong. We as Christians are called to sacrifice all of the time. But the difference is, for us, we are promised a reward for our sacrifice. It feels like sacrifice because we often don't see that reward this side of heaven, but we have a reward. Jesus was perfectly content the way he was, right? He has love within himself as the triune God. He's perfect. Everything's good. The only reason Jesus died for us was selflessness, love. For us, we have to try to emulate that, but we have the added benefit of a promise of reward in heaven. That's pretty nice, huh? And when you're living for God, your pride, which by the way, is the same thing that causes you to call yourself a loser or a baller, your pride doesn't get to call the shots anymore. It doesn't define you. Because God doesn't care about your outward appearances or what you look like according to the world. He doesn't care if you're rich or if you have a big house, if you went to school, if you have a hot wife, or if you look like a supermodel. His only priority is love. So yeah, if you need to go to school to accomplish the goal of love, he'll tell you to do that. But if he doesn't, it doesn't actually matter. That's not to say that you can't go to school even if it's not what God told you precisely to do. Obviously, don't do what God says not to do, but you can do things that you want. But just remember that the love is the priority. Everything else is secondary. The next reason that Jesus didn't defend himself is because the truth speaks for itself. Now, at this point, Jesus had already established, by the time he was crucified, he had already established that he was the way, the truth, and the life. So Jesus is the truth. Defending himself would be trying to defend the truth, but as he says, anyone on the side of truth will listen to me. That's what he says, right? So he knew that anyone who cared about the truth, who actually wanted righteousness, would listen to him had already taken his teachings to heart, or would take them to heart when the disciples delivered it to them. Okay, so Jesus wasn't resigned to defeat when he didn't defend himself. He rather understood a very, very important concept that we should all understand. People will only listen to you when you're delivering God's word or delivering the truth. They will only listen to you if they want righteousness. And if they want righteousness, they're not going to do crap like falsely accuse you and try to get you killed, right? To defend himself to these people would be completely pointless. He knew that. Finally, Jesus didn't defend himself because he wasn't ashamed. We spent a lot of time talking about how shame affects us as human beings. And I think we spend a lot of time thinking that shame has a place in our lives. Like we think, oh, there's bad stress and good stress. There's bad fear and good fear. There's bad shame and good shame. And yes, this can be chalked up to a semantics argument, but I think it's helpful to just say that shame is from the pit of hell, and it really has no place ever. In fact, Genesis teaches us that shame came as a direct result of the fall. Adam and Eve ate the fruit, they were ashamed, right? Now, what's weird is that Jesus didn't deal with shame because Jesus never sinned. So Jesus wasn't fallen, therefore shame wasn't really a problem for him. But you know what's really interesting? If you accept the gift of Jesus' sacrifice, if you accept relationship with God and follow him, then you get to live as if you had never sinned as well. I know that sounds crazy. And disclaimer, there is such a thing as conviction, okay? That's when you do something wrong. God tells you you did something wrong, and then he calls you to change your mind or repent, okay? But God never accuses you. He never beats you up. And you never have to defend yourself against conviction. So one of the easiest ways to tell the difference between shame and conviction is shame makes you want to hide, to fight, to defend yourself. Makes you hate goodness because goodness makes you feel terrible. Conviction causes you to want to make things right. It's a lot less complicated, weirdly. Now, oftentimes, many people are not capable of experiencing conviction because shame has taken such a hold of them. They can't tell the difference anymore. God tries to give us conviction and we just receive shame because we were caught up in that mindset. That's when we end up blaming good people for making us feel bad about ourselves, even though they're just existing and following God. We blame them because of shame. It's also when we fall away from following God because we feel like it's too dang hard. If that's you today, if you feel hopeless, lost in your own self-hatred, I've got something that will help you. And it's really just one idea. I want you to take the road to the cross as inspiration. And instead of hearing a story like Jesus's, a story of incredible sacrifice, something that you could never live up to and feeling ashamed that you can't do that, I want you to think of this idea. God loves you because he is good, not because you are. It's okay if you don't feel this yet. If it doesn't make total sense, it's okay if you still struggle with shame. But understand, this is the key to solving your shame, whether you realize it yet or not. So wherever you're at, whether you related to one part of my message today, all of it, or none of it, wherever you're at, I want you to meditate on this idea day and night until it sinks in. Because if you allow this reality to drive you instead of the incessant need to be good enough, and if you think you're free of that, maybe you are, but chances are you just don't realize how much it's driving you. If you let this drive you instead of the need to be good enough, you cannot imagine the amazing things that you'll be capable of. Now, today is not the first Sunday of the month, and that's normally when we would take communion, but we're going to take communion today because, come on, we're talking about the crucifixion. This is the time to take communion, right? And as we take communion, I want you to just soak in the reality of Jesus' sacrifice for you. Sink into the gratitude for what he did. No guilt, no pride, no pressure. Just enjoy it. And I want you to continue to meditate on this phrase. I'm going to leave it up as we gather our elements and as we take communion. Continue to meditate on this idea. There are tables here and here on either side of the stage where we put the offering, and there are also tables in the back on either side. So go ahead, grab your communion elements, bring them back to your seat, and wait, and we'll take them together. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Let's take. In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me." Let's drink. Jesus, what more can we say than thank you? What more can we do than worship you? God, let these elements that we've taken be a testament to what you did, really and truly. Give us a deeper understanding of what you did. Help us to understand that heaven is real. It's our reality. Let that sink into every single part of our lives. Let it drive us and motivate us. Help us to let go of striving. Let everything we do be truly and fully and only motivated by love. The love that you have for us, the love that we have for you, and the love that exists for all of us. I pray a special blessing over everyone as we head into Holy Week. Help us to be holy as you are holy. Amen. God bless you. Go enjoy some great potluck food.